Yeah, absolutely fascinating and I think important presentation. But I was thinking as I was listening to you about within the military, is there strategic planning? If one thinks about a soldier in Africa and there's increased temperature, there's changes in disease patterns, is there planning within the military for that kind of change? Because we know it's happening. And if you look 5 years down the road and you ask, you know, if somebody is out there, if a soldier is out there and they're exposed to all of these changes, how does the military respond?
It is a reactive measure. We do some low-level planning. There's planning going on across all levels, but the focus is on a small unit that's going to Africa. You know, they'll get a threat assessment of country X. You know, temperatures, highs, means, diseases that are focused that they need to be aware of. You know, stay away from snakes, stay away from ticks, whatnot. But the support is more of a reactionary measure of we're going to country X, and therefore focus on this. We don't necessarily have the ability to think globally from an Army standpoint because it would be too time consuming. What it does reduce is so when you go to country X, our effectiveness is degraded because we can't operate in temperatures of, I stepped off the plane in Iraq in Saudi Arabia in 2003, and it was like 116 at 12 o'clock at night. It was like having a hairdryer right in front of your face. And it took all of us a week to 10 days just to get, climatized, but our effectiveness is reduced. So we have to start thinking about this so that we can properly plan and then think of the ways. We can't skirt climate change, but we can think about it more effectively, efficiently, and have the support so that we can properly train and execute our mission.
To your point, to tack on another, one of my techs went into Iraq as well, and he was a big guy, and he said that one of the problems they had was they kept having to don their chemical gear because of concerns over potential chemical attacks. So you take an environment like that, and now you put on chem gear, and you have to drink a lot of water but you can't break the seal on your chem gear or urinate in a carbon suit. So the complications are many, especially down at the soldier level. One of our prior fellows looked more, Patric took a broader view of sort of anticipating threats down the road. The prior fellow took a look more at the soldier's level and how to adapt or optimize that individual.
Hi, so your operations concept included cyber and space. What do you see, especially cyber, how do you see that fitting into this future, looking into how to combat climate change, or not combat, but prepare for climate change?
Cyberspace and climate change?
Yeah.
Our cyberspace focus from the military is more on hacking, cyber threats, if you will, vulnerabilities, electronic systems. I don't believe that, in my eyes, Sarah, Sarah's a actively major veterinarian who's perfect in this as well. I don't know of any overlap between cyberspace and
Okay, I was
climate
just thinking
change.
resource security.
That's an interesting aspect. So,
Well, if you think of the Russian bots and Russian influence campaign, clearly we're at the hearts and minds relative to climate change and climate action. So couldn't a nation stir the pot, so to speak, and influence people's thoughts on things? That seems to be what we're seeing a lot of in cyberspace.
I would agree.
So is climate impact playing out in the long run as but that's going to just get worse and multiply over time? How do you see the
Well, we have the, hopefully, hope is not a method, but with the Futures Command, with the ability of getting climate change as a sliver within what they're looking at in the future. We've got to make tanks better. We've got to make batteries smaller, lighter. We've got to be able to do a better job with water. So there are avenues that we can get better. We have agencies within the Department of Defense that look at these things. The emphasis might not be there on it right now. We need to get it back into the security strategy so they can continue. And their funding isn't necessarily within that 4-year window. Their funding is a little bit further out. That allows them to look at futuristic, stormtrooper type mentality solutions that are out there.
Give an example a little bit there too. I remembered back when, in the 80s and 90s, we were preparing, the military prepares for Cold War era, large theater, short duration types of intense conflict. So Army canvas tents, generators, maybe air conditioning, maybe not. So you basically have a short duration infrastructure. Well, with these long duration deployments that we have now, you pitch a canvas tent in a desert with a generator and maybe air conditioning. It's as inefficient as you could possibly think of. So the amount of fuel that you need for something like that is through the roof. So they've been developing these solar tent cities that run more dominantly off of renewable energy that's quite plentiful in the area. Now you cut the fuel supply, you cut the need for fuel, which is makes you very vulnerable because it's a soft target, it's a bomb going down the road. So there's a lot of sort of opportunities to do better with how we think going forward.
Do you see a role for the military using their future climate threat assessments in areas that are at risk or in areas where there are deployments or whatever that are at risk from certain climate risks to kind of help minimize the chance of another Arab Spring or something like that?
From a national strategy standpoint, yes. From an Army as an individual entity, I find it isn't necessarily our true role to be looking out on those things. I'm not sure. I know that we need to focus on, as a Department of Defense, we need to focus on what's out there. But I think I think the CENTCOM or the EUCOM commander, whoever that may be, they all have political advisors. And those political advisors need to be watching and being tied into countries within their region to be situationally aware of those next tipping points. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Fantastic presentation, thank you, fascinating. I'm wondering how, climate science is very complex and there are a lot of uncertainties and there's a lot of differences among model projections into the future depending on which model you're using. It just strikes me that you need really specific information about what is anticipated to happen everywhere in the world, which is really a daunting task. I'm just wondering, can you speak to what is the flow of climate science information into the military? How do people learn about it? What are the interactions?
Well, we have subset agencies within the federal government and Department of Defense that look at the impacts of these. We have a section within the Training and Doctrine, or we used to, Training and Doctrine Command, that focused on informational, it was the G2, if you will, the intel side, where climate change and the future impacts of climate change is where they were looking at those. There are opportunities for, how do I want to say it? I just don't know where, I don't know, that's a good question. Before I say something that I don't truly know, that is something that I would have to really consider, because I don't have an answer at this point right now. I apologize.
I don't know how easy this is to answer, but it actually kind of builds on Dr. Amber's question. To what extent, you said right now there's kind of a pause, but before that, to what extent did the CIA or any other intelligence agencies help with this sort of future planning?
Well, I think it's informational sharing. And I don't know of any direct relation on climate from Army, Department of Defense to CIA to any other agencies off the top of my head. Lower levels maybe, or maybe even at the higher levels, there's we all dump into the Defense Intelligence Agency for shared information. And I think that's where our guys that are looking at climate change is pulling information out. They're also obviously getting information. It's not verified data, but it's on-ground, real-time temperature fluctuations or potential impacts because of a drought. So I think the sharing is there from an informational standpoint, but an actual relationship, I doubt that there is one in existence right now.
So, I know that when I taught environmental science and climate change related material in the military, through the 90s and early 2000s, not really much of any pushback on, there might have been discussions over how bad is it going to be, what we should do about it, those sorts of things, which are all perfectly legitimate. But there was no sort of denial, major denial. What have you seen, and I probably ran in more science and researchy kinds of circles, and obviously the military is going to be a reflection of the entire population of the US. What have you confronted as far as climate change? Has it been is it a topic of conversation? Do you get any pushback on it?
No, I don't believe that, from our standpoint, Colonel in the United States Army, that there's any pushback on it at all. I mean, we're in support. I think the general population of officers and non-commissioned officers are in support of that. I mean, I think our younger generation is very, very situationally aware of climate change. There is probably far more than a general, four-star general officer. They're much more relatable with the knowledge of what's going on. The problem that we have is heavy tank, lots of fuel, have to do mission now.
The here and now.
The here and now,
versus,
not for 4 years. But with something like the Futures Command, where they're looking at that, and they look with the acquisition of future equipment, we can't think of heavy tank, lots of fuel. We have to think lighter, we have to think more efficient, because we need to be good stewards of that.
You may have said it. When did the Futures Command stand up? I don't
It's in the process right now.
Okay.
I don't know if they've actually taken the guide on and have become fully mission capable. I believe it's still a little bit in the mix, but it's there. We're working on it. Has it been structured in org chart? Not to my knowledge, but I could be out of the loop a little bit.
That's a good idea.
And they're still struggling to, I think at one point is, who do we bring into the Futures Command? We've got to bring budget in, so the money guys can think longer than 4 years. We've got to bring in force structure, so how much do we need in the future? We need a slice on, it's going to be a small slice, but we need our foot in the door to be able to at least sit at the table in some position, whether that's from a medical standpoint, whether that's from an intel standpoint, and be able to talk smartly at the table of impacts of climate change. Because right now, it's take objective, big heavy tank move. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.